welcome all of you to the Youth Climate Conclave 2021. In order to stream the event proceedings, we are recording the event today. The conclave is an initiative of the Delegation of the European Union to India, together with GIZ India, CEEW and TERI. The initiative is financed and implemented under the Strategic Partnership for Implementation of the Paris Agreement project, where the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Government of India is the nodal ministry. This is the second edition of the conclave, and over the next 3 days, we seek to engage youth in India in science-based discussions on the most relevant climate change issues. As an outcome of the program, a youth pledge will be drafted in a participatory manner, which will then be presented in the Adaptation Futures Conference scheduled next week. Conclave today is graced by His Excellency Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, Union Minister, Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Government of India. He will be sharing his keynote address via a video message. His Excellency Mr. Vincenzo di Luca, Ambassador of Italy to India. His Excellency Mr. Alexander Ellis, British High Commissioner to India. And His Excellency Mr. Ugo Astuto, Ambassador of the European Union to India. Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General TERI. Now, without further ado, I now request Dr. Dhawan, Director General TERI, to deliver the welcome address. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Taru. And I'm so happy to be part of this Youth Climate Conclave 2021, being hosted virtually from today, 29th to 1st of October. Presence of eminent dignitaries, His Excellency Mr. Di Luca, Ambassador of Italy, His Excellency Mr. Ugo Astuto, Ambassador of the European Union to India, and His Excellency Mr. Alexander Ellis, British High Commissioner to India. It's not just your presence, I'll say it's your commitment to the cause. So thank you so much. And I personally feel that it's the youth whom we have to change. They are going to be trendsetter for us as well once they are convinced. We are very privileged to be connected with Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, Union Minister, Ministry of Environment and Forests, Government of India, and we look forward to hearing his special message for the youth. Now, all these, as I said, that your presence basically signifies that this is an important initiative. And if we want to change the world, perhaps this is the best way to change the mindset or involve youth in further journey. Youth Climate Conclave that connects with youth in the age group of 13 to 25 years from across the country on issues related to climate change. It is important to reflect that eventually, when we hand over the planet to our youth, we are also passing to them climate-related impacts to respond and cope up with. Drought, flooding, extreme weather events, rising temperatures, and diversifications are recognized as some of the climate-related impacts to respond and cope up with. It is also like if we look at, we are not talking of something that's going to happen in the future. We are already witnessing it today, whether it is the cloud busting in Uttarakhand that is happening time and again. Earlier it was a rare event, now it has become a sort of routine event. Look at the forest fires in Amazon, floods in Germany, California, New York. So all these things, they have proved that what a decade before we were talking as a threat, that has become a reality today. It's not our youth who is to be blamed, because they haven't done anything wrong. And if at all, if we talk of this age group, maybe they have enjoyed some of the few of the things which were non-sustainable, but the decision was taken by us, by their parents. They are not to be blamed. And the worst part is that as the time passes, it is they who are going to really face the music or what is happening around. We are also one positive thing that I find in the youth today, and that is that discussions with them in a way gives you confidence that they are responsible citizens. You don't have to convince them, they know. They also have commitments towards that we owe something to the society, we owe something to the planet. So happily, that kind of feeling is among the youth. It's also not because many a times, especially developing economies, we raise the point, why are we told to reduce CO2 or GHG emissions and so on? We have to develop. One of the important messages is that development can be sustainable. Development has to take place. No one can tell anyone that stop where you are or go back to the Stone Age. It is that please use new technologies, development strategies, and look for developing and practicing sustainable solutions. YCC, through its inception in 2019, has created several such opportunities of reaching out to Indian youth from across the country. This conclave promises to be an interesting event with high-level speakers, interviews by youth, video messages, and youth debates. YCC 2021 will conclude with a youth pledge that will be presented in the Adaptation Futures Conference planned from October 3rd, 2021. We are fully aware and we appreciate that climate change requires action at policy level and also changes in our personal lifestyle. 1 out of every 6 person in the world falls between the age group of 15 to 25. Hence, it is critical that we work with the youth through each and every opportunity that can trigger strong social and environmental awareness. After all, the future is in the hands of our youth, and it is through them that we can usher in a new paradigm of change. TERI welcomes you to the Youth Climate Conclave 2021, the Energy and Resources Institute, that's TERI. It's an independent, multi-dimensional organizations with capacities in research, policy, consultancy, and implementation. It has pioneered conversations and actions in energy, environment, climate change, biotechnology, and sustainability space for over 4 decades. I like to mention that TERI, I should say, we pioneered, or rather, if we look at renewable energy, TERI started developing technology or started preaching that that's the future much before others started talking about it. We were the early voices in the field of climate change. Our former Director General, Dr. Pachauri, he was chairman of IPCC, and in a way you can say that every person in TERI, we knew what it means, and we had actually launched a study in 1997, which was Green India 2047, where we have drawn what will be the state if we continue business as usual. And we didn't stop by scaring people. Our next report was Disha, which was that development must continue by changing the way we work and we become more sustainable. For this very reason, TERI has also established TERI School of Advanced Studies, which is basically that you train the youth, because you do imbibe many things in life, but at the same time, formal training helps you a lot to go towards sustainability. The Institute, TERI, is led by a multidisciplinary team of scientists, sociologists, economists, and engineers. And as I mentioned, young students. With a twin focus on research and outreach, we are well positioned to lead this initiative of Youth Climate Conclave. We are conscious of the fact that youth of today are demanding climate action from world leaders. It is imperative to address concerns raised by youth with knowledge-based and solution-oriented responses. This is more relevant in today's circumstances since the impact of COVID-19 on education system is grave. We don't know whom is impacting the worst. You look at the primary school children, I think their development is not proper, and those who are in nuclear families, I don't know how they are managing young children. But it's equally important, like I get disturbed that students who are pursuing their degrees in science, either at or pursuing their graduate studies, they are missing opportunity of even entering the laboratory. And more so, a sort of uncertainty, because see, I should say 2 years back, we have never thought that a pandemic of this nature can hit the world, because all the time we thought we are much advanced. The pandemic has also taught us one thing, and that is whatever happens in one corner of the planet, it may have an impact at the global level. And therefore, when we are talking of whether it is climate change or education or awareness, I'm sure that's also going to run across international boundaries. And that also teaches us that you cannot afford to leave your young citizen in silos, in doubt and anxiety. So we have to give them confidence. We have to give them a sort of that we are on the path of recovery, whether it is COVID or whether it is the clean environment around us. I'm sure Youth Climate Conclave will be an important step in bridging these gaps. We are reaching out to a generation of children and teenagers to create a ripple effect to push the society towards environment responsible behavior, simultaneously explaining the science of climate change and global development in this area. Thank you so much for your attention, and I do look forward to a fruitful 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind words. I now invite His Excellency Mr. Vincenzo di Luca, Ambassador of Italy to India, to deliver the special address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Namaste. Dear Minister Yadav, dear colleagues, dear DG Director General TERI, dear students, young people, dear all. Just 1 week after our National Youth Forum organized with TERI, it's my pleasure to speak again about your involvement in climate agenda on the occasion of this second edition of Youth Climate Conclave. While I'm addressing you, the youth event on climate change, Youth for Climate, Driving Ambition, linked to the pre-COP26 hosted by Italy, the first ever completely devoted to youth, started yesterday in Milan. The debate has already become animated and good insights are expected to be released. We have heard strong voices from 400 young people coming from all over the world in favor of climate action, included Greta Thunberg from Sweden. The Italian Minister of Ecological Transition, Roberto Cingolani, opened the initiative yesterday, along with the President of COP26, Alok Sharma, the UNFCCC Executive Secretary, Patricia Espinosa, and the Mayor of Milan, Giuseppe Sarri. Minister Cingolani welcomed the participants coming from 186 countries around the world gathered in Milan. Reminding that climate change and global social inequalities must be treated together. He asked young voices for helping them identify new visionary solutions on climate issues. Sustainability, that means climate friendly policies and policies which address social injustice is the future of our policy in Europe, all over the world, of course, also here in India. In our vision, we see Italy particularly committed in the multilateral stage to reaffirm and strengthen its role as a virtuous, ambitious, and supportive country in order to tackle these urgent challenges. Main message of our G20 presidency, people, planet, prosperity, is our focus in this G20 2021. The 3 Ps are interconnected pillars of our action because we need an holistic approach to the present challenge, either environmental, health challenges, and also social imbalances. In this spirit, we deem it crucial to promote the engagement of the young generation in the decision-making processes, making young people responsible and recognize them as key players in climate action and sustainability. The young participants must have the chance to be among the relevant actors involved in the global climate action, as long as civil society, the business world, the academy, local authorities, and regional institutions. We also believe that young involvement, along with the public organization, research center, expertise of companies, is crucial as far as energy transition, ecological transition as a major challenge in the climate agenda is concerned. Energy transition is really a topic, a key topic, not only in order to cope with climate change, but also for the world future growth, for India, for Europe, for Italy, in a wider spectrum. On one hand, on May 8th, in Oporto, European Union and India, among other things, highlighted the urgency of addressing the interdependent challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and agreed to cooperate in view of accelerating the use of renewable energy, promoting energy efficiency, developing smart grids and storage technologies, modernize the electricity market. In our bilateral relationship with India, in the action plan adopted by the 2 Prime Ministers of Italy and India last November 2020, we focus the new partnership on green economy, clean tech, and renewables. And we are launching a long-term partnership on energy transition, because we are aware that we have big potential between Italy, Europe, and India in sharing technology and promoting investment in energy transition fields like smart cities, mobility, electricity distribution, gas transport sector, waste to wealth, renewables, and last but not least, policy and regulatory framework that will decide the future of energy markets here in India and all over the world. We hope that the process towards Glasgow will allow us to get new results in the negotiation in Glasgow, because we need action. We need that action now, and we are ready to do our part. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for motivating our students and also sharing with us their role in climate action. We wish you all the best for the upcoming events of COP26. We are fortunate to have with us His Excellency Mr. Alexander Ellis, British High Commissioner to India, with us today. Welcome, sir. Request you to address our young participants.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Vincenzo for handing over the baton as the co-chairs of this process, the UN process, and Minister, dear colleagues, Ugo, Director General. Just a few brief words. So, if you read the 1990 a report by the IPCC, it has a 92 edition to it. That gives you kind of the message which came to my generation. I was 23 in 1990. And what was that saying? That was telling us that climate change is for real, that it's going to increase. So the sort of basic science was there. What it couldn't tell you was just how fast the climate was going to change. And a lot of the work since then has really shown that. So this problem existed 1 generation ago and was identified, and it was indeed discussed famously at Rio in '92. So the first thing is to try and cheer you all up. Things have actually, in some respects, improved since then. Firstly, the science has got a lot clearer. Even after the 2008 financial crisis, you had some disputes saying, well, we're not so sure, can we really afford all this green stuff? But now there's no doubt about it. So the science is even clearer. Secondly, we've actually done something about it. European countries, certainly, the United Kingdom has, so we've reduced our emissions by, I think, just over 40% greenhouse gas emissions since 1990 was managing to grow as an economy, and other economies have been doing similar things. And thirdly, the politics has got better, I would say, in the sense that you really do have a very, very strong push for action on climate all over the world. So that generation, it did something, if you like, but it is not enough. If you look at the IPCC report, which came out a couple of months ago, that shows, compared to 1990, just how quickly the climate is warming and what the challenge is to try and get us on the path towards a 1.5 degrees increase in global temperatures compared to pre-industrial levels. And it's pretty scary reading, and it's pretty scary reading for all parts of the world, and that includes South Asia. And I was in Kolkata on Monday and Tuesday, and it's pretty scary reading if you're in Kolkata. And as the Director General was saying, it isn't something for the future, it's something for the now. So the science fiction is kind of now fact, basically, and that's what we're dealing with. So that's the next big challenge for us, and it's fantastic to see the ambition of India in that respect through its ambition and indeed its achievements on renewable energy, for example. The UK has set itself a target of reducing its emissions not by 40%, but by 73% by 2035. The European Union is doing similar things, very high levels of ambition in what we're trying to do. So there is quite a high ambition. But the big difference between 1990 and now is really the terrific success story of India and China and many other countries in their development. GDP per head of China and India was roughly the same in 1990, about $350 per head, if I'm not mistaken. And that's grown enormously, and that's been a great success story. But we have to face the fact, and this isn't just a comment for China and India, it's a comment for many other economies of the world. We have produced in the last 30 years roughly the same amount of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, as we had in the previous rest of history. So that gives you a sense of just the intensity with which we're both developing, but also the challenge we have on climate change. So we have our ambitions for how to deal with that. We have to do that on our own countries. We have to do that together. Italy and India are doing great things together, so ditto the UK and India. And many other countries too, but we also have to do it as a planet. And that's why the COP, starting in the beginning of November in Glasgow, is so important in terms of setting the next framework within which then countries in all their different ways, and I say again, India is making a huge contribution to this, can achieve a sustainable development. And that requires the next generation now. The next generation, which knows an awful lot more than the generation when I was 23, to now move us along, because we need your voice, we need your votes, voting matters a lot here, and we need your ideas. It's a great thing to say that the Prince William has launched the Earthshot Prize, and there are 2 finalists. This is for kind of how you're going to deal with sustainable challenges. 2 finalists from India, one of whom is 15 years old, Vinisha Umashankar, and her solar ironing card, and a whole lot of other things besides. So ideas come at all ages and from everywhere, and India has an enormous contribution it is making and can make even more so to actually making sure that the next generation takes us that much further than this generation has done. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency, for a very, very empowering address. No words would suffice to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Ugo Occhiuto, Ambassador of the European Union to India. Thank you for supporting the conclave in more ways than one, sir. Request you to please deliver the special remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, Minister, dear colleagues, Director General, it's a great pleasure for me to address this second Youth Climate Conclave. And I think we all agree that the youth is the obvious major stakeholder in the fight against climate change and biodiversity loss. My first event as EU ambassador to India actually was a kick-off event for the first edition of the Youth Climate Conclave in 2019. But I can see that despite the need for a virtual format this year, well, I see that TERI has put together a very interesting program again for the youth to discuss the latest scientific findings on climate change, the state of play of negotiations, as well as to look into their own role in finding solutions. And let me start here by saying that unfortunately the latest scientific assessment of the situation is not good. And here I will echo what Alex was also saying and referring to the recent IPCC report. But this report, I mean, the findings of this report are alarming and must instill in all of us a sense of urgency. Temperatures are rising. And we have clear empirical evidence around us of extreme weather events becoming ever more frequent. So we need to act now for the sake of future generations. And we have to take bold decisions at COP26 and at COP15. From the European Union side, our actions are guided by the European Green Deal. We want to change the very economic paradigm in our societies. We want to achieve growth through the protection of the environment, through a sustainable use of resources, and not at the expense of the world we live in. So we must set in place the transition towards a green, digital, and resilient economic model. We want to move to a climate neutral European continent by 2050. Not all people will immediately benefit from the transition. And for instance, we need to ensure that workers in carbon intensive sectors are retrained and that the poor do not suffer from climate action. No one must be left behind. But the direction of travel is clear, a climate neutral European continent by 2050. And to be able to reach this objective, we have agreed to reduce emissions by at least 55% compared to 1990, increasing our regional reduction target, which was 40%. And let me underscore that this objective is enshrined in the new EU climate law. So it's a legal prescription. It's not just a generic aspiration. There are some positive signs in the sense that we see that the transition is happening. And countries still planning huge investments in fossil fuels are starting to realize the risk of ending up with expensive stranded assets. But we all know that we are still far from what is needed to keep emissions down. Emissions down globally in line with the commitments taken in Paris. So we need a higher level of ambition and a renewed sense of urgency. But no country can tackle alone climate change or biodiversity loss for that matter. We are already, the European Union is working already closely with India in the area of energy efficiency, for instance, of renewables, of sustainable finance, climate mitigation and adaptation. And both the European Union and India have very ambitious renewable energy targets for the next decade. So together we shall demonstrate that strong government goals can drive innovation in our economies and contribute to reaching the Paris Agreement goals. So let me conclude here and thank TERI and the Minister of the Environment and my Italian and UK colleagues. More than anyone else, the youth will be affected by the impact of climate change. So it's important that the youth speaks up and acts as a constant spur to action. We need to be ambitious and we need to take action now for the sake of future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for motivating our young minds. It is an honor for all of us to receive a video message from the Honorable Union Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change Government of India, Shri Bhupendra Yadav ji, requesting the program select TERI to please play the video.
Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General of Energy and Resource Institute, invitees from Embassy of Italy, Embassy of United Kingdom, and Delegation of European Union to India, invitees from various organizations, my dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to address the Youth Climate Conclave, which is an initiative of the Delegation of the European Union to India, together with GIZ India, CEEW and TERI. I am happy to know that the initiative is financed and implemented under the Strategic Partnership for Implementation of the Paris Agreement project, where my ministry, Ministry for Environment, Forest and Climate Change, is the nodal ministry. It is important that any bilateral cooperation on environment and climate should be implemented in line with priorities of Government of India. Across the globe, the young are considered as agents for social transformation. Therefore, the youth of today can play a very important and crucial role in deciding the course of planet. This is only one Earth and there is no alternative. Our actions, vision, and ideas should be guided by the planetary boundaries and what need to be addressed for survival of human beings. In this regard, let me recall what our Honorable Prime Minister stated. We, the present generation, have the responsibility to act as a trustee of the rich natural wealth for future generations. The issue is not merely about climate change, it is about climate justice. My dear young friends, although our planet has provided us with a plenty of natural resources, but out of oversight, we have not utilized these resources responsibly and currently consume far beyond our planet's carrying capacity. We should learn how to use and produce in sustainable ways that will reverse the harm that we have inflicted on the planet. The climate challenges, loss of biodiversity, ecological imbalance, etc., are the result of human quest to conquer nature. Our father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, said, "The world has enough for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed." The challenge of climate change being faced today is the result of unsustainable lifestyle and consumption patterns. As for India, sustainable lifestyle and care for nature has been part of our tradition and culture for centuries. For ensuring sustainable consumption and production, which is also advocated by the Goal 12 of Sustainable Goals of the United Nations, a collective global action on sustainable lifestyle is need of the hour. Youth of today can play as agent of sustainable lifestyle. Young friends, let me share some of my thought on India's climate action and our position on issue relating to climate change. Although India is not responsible for the current climate change problem, given that climate change has no boundary, we are committed to be part of the solutions for climate change. In light of the recent finding of IPCC report of 2021, collective global concrete action against climate change led by developed countries is a must for saving the human species from climate doomsday. It is now or never. India also recognized the urgency of strong climate action in this decade to keep the world on track to reach the temperature goals of the Paris Agreement. However, these actions should be based on fundamental principle of Rio Conventions. Our climate action are guided by UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement, and collective global climate action should be guided by the principle common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, national priorities, and circumstances. There can be no climate justice without equity and CBDR, RC, and fulfillment of commitment made by developed countries on climate finance and transfer of technology and factoring the responsibility paradigm for historical emissions. Our collective global climate action should also lead to sustainable development and eradication of poverty, especially in the developing countries. Friends, let me also share with all of you India's achievement in the climate front guided by its tradition India is always committed to work with the world for a better world, leaving no one behind. Even in the midst of this pandemic, India recognized the need for strong international cooperation to tackle the interdependent challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and environment degradation. We stand together in solidarity with the global community in mounting a strong and effective response that secure the health of the planet and its people. India remains steadfast in its commitment to join and lead effort to combat climate change with the multilaterally agreed convention and its Paris Agreement. India's NDC, National Determined Contribution, is ambitious, and we have consistently raised ambitions such as through an enormous energy transition commitment of installing 450 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. We have also recently enhanced our ambition in biofuels for a target of 20% blending of ethanol with petrol from 2030 to 2025. We are also expanding our forest and taking many steps for conservation of wildlife and biodiversity initiative, including target for restoring 26 million hectares of degraded and deforested land and development of 200 urban forests. We have developed biodiversity registers and expand combined forest and tree cover of 24.56% of the total geographic area of the country. We are undertaking new programs for conservation of species like lions and dolphins, among others. India has achieved reduction of 24% in emission intensity of its GDP between 2005 and 2016, thereby achieving its pre-2020 voluntary target. International Solar Alliance Leadership Group for Industry Transition and Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure are our initiative at the international level. My dear young friends, to conclude, I would like to state that youth need to occupy the future for climate change. Youth of today should act now, else you will face the fury of climate change. The Youth Climate Conclave is a great platform for spreading awareness on climate change and related issues, and I wish this conclave a very successful event. I am sure all of you will play a very important role in making our planet a better planet with no one left behind. Thank you. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Thank you. We extend a wholehearted gratitude to the Ministry for spearheading SPIPA project and also guiding us in organizing the conclave. I now request Dr. Livleen Corpado, Associate Director and Senior Fellow, Environment Education and Awareness, TERI, to deliver a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Taru. A very good afternoon to all. The year 2019 had witnessed the genesis of Youth Climate Conclave, and today we are happy to share with you that this journey still continues in spite of the odds we all have faced due to COVID. Schools and colleges were shut down across the country, but in no way the positive energy of youth could be overshadowed by these changes. They stayed connected with the conclave through several online activities. The conclave has cultivated support from eminent personalities who have also graced today the launch of Youth Climate Conclave. His Excellency Mr. Vincenzo Luca, Ambassador of Italy to India. We thank you for sparing time out of your busy schedule to participate in today's event. In light of Italy's commitment to the pre-COP26 action, your continuous engagement with the young generation, recognizing them as key players in climate action, is indeed very encouraging, sir. We have always seen in you a supporter of youth cause. Thank you, sir. His Excellency Mr. Alexander Ellis, British High Commissioner to India. Words fail to express our gratitude for your presence in today's event. This is a second opportunity within a fortnight wherein youth have been lucky to meet you virtually, and we hope that these opportunities do not cease to exist. We remember what you had shared with us earlier. Youth have the power of authority, voice, vote, and ideas. and to make people in power listen. And this conclave is another step in this direction, sir. Thank you for your presence. His Excellency Mr. Hugo Estuto, Ambassador of European Union to India. It is under your dynamic leadership and blessings that Youth Climate Conclave evolved into an enriching and educative experience for the youth. Your words stay with us and our guide and are still our guiding light. Quote, we need to act now and be ambitious for the sake of the future generations. Thank you, Your Excellency, for steering this annual youth initiative. Today was an unparalleled opportunity for the youth of India to hear the views of His Excellency Shri Bhupinder Yadavji, Honorable Union Minister, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of India. MOEFCC has supported the conclave since 2019 and has provided direction and opportunities to scale this up to a national movement with involvement of eco-clubs. We thank you, sir, for your kind words and also promise that we will continue to endeavor and create similar opportunities for youth in future. Indian government stands with the cause of youth, and today we have witnessed this in action. Thank you, sir. We also acknowledge the support received from Environment, Education and Climate Change divisions at MOEFCC for the Climate Conclave. I also take this opportunity to thank Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General TERI, for her pivotal role in ensuring that TERI progresses on its journey of growth, connecting with all sections of society through path-breaking research and outreach efforts. Thank you, ma'am. An event of this magnitude is possible only with a common vision of diverse stakeholders who independently and collectively endeavor to contribute their very best in scaling the impact. We have with us an eminent personalities who will be addressing the youth through knowledge enrichment sessions of the conclave. We thank you in advance individually and collectively for your presence in the conclave. Valuable contributions in form of video messages have also been recorded and will be played during the event. Collectively, for both of these, we express our gratitude to senior leadership at TERI, CEEW, CSTEP, GIZ, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, University of Amsterdam, European Union University Institute, GU for SDGs UNEP, Mahindra Group, UNEP India, UNICEF, IYCN, UNDP, Tata Steel Limited for the valuable contributions towards the success of the conclave. Thank you. We are also grateful to the organizers of Adaptation Futures Conference for providing an opportunity to showcase the outcomes of the conclave at the global platform. Thank you. The event is orchestrated through a partnership support, and TERI is extremely grateful to GIZ and Delegation of the European Union to India for steering the program with their advice and efforts. Thank you. We also thank all the eco-clubs, state nodal agencies of MOEFCC who are participating in the conclave to show their work in the field of climate change education. I am glad that this journey has enabled the youth to collectively voice their views, exchange ideas, and form a sustainable network. Each and every contribution is acknowledged and is of immense value to us. And my young friends, always remember, we believe in you and you are a part of the YCC family. So please do stay in touch, and we wish you the best for your future endeavors. Thank you all, and with this, we formally conclude the inaugural of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind words. And thank you all the dignitaries for joining the inaugural session. Moving on, we now begin with the panel discussion.
You won't like to have a photograph of all the dignitaries?
Yes, ma'am.
You have already taken.
Ma'am, we have already taken, but we don't mind another one.
No, we should have a formal picture. May I request His Excellencies to please Yes, yes, thank you, sir. Kindly come on to video mode. His Excellency, Sir Mr. Vincenzo de Luca, His Excellency Mr. Alexander Ellis, could you please come on the camera now?
And you'll also have to put minister's address photograph along with it, that you can do later. Yeah.
Yes.
They are not there. Maybe they have already left.
I guess we'll have to use the pictures you have already taken.
We will structure it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Moving on, we now begin with the panel discussion. Session 1 focuses on the notion of do we listen to science? The session is moderated by Mr. Jay Kumar Gaurav, Senior Technical Advisor, GIZ India. The speakers of the sessions are Dr. Indu K. Murthy, Principal Research Scientist, Adaptation and Risk Analysis, the Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy, and Dr. Ritu Mathur, Senior Fellow and Director, Integrated Assessment and Modeling, TERI. Over to you, Jay, for further deliberations.
Thanks a lot, Taru. And good afternoon, everyone. I welcome all of you again to the Youth Climate Conclave and now to the technical sessions that we are organizing as part of the Youth Climate Conclave. We are very lucky to have two very eminent experts from India on climate change, as well as internationally, I would say. We have Dr. Indu Murthy and from CSTEP and Dr. Ritu Mathur from TERI. And also it's very nice that we have two experts who are addressing two key areas related to climate change. So Dr. Indu Murthy is an expert in adaptation, vulnerability assessment and adaptation issues, and Dr. Ritu Mathur is an expert in the mitigation aspects related to climate change. So in terms of like my introductory remarks, I would say that already the ambassadors and the minister's address highlighted that we know about climate change as an issue and the possible adverse impacts that it can have for a we know about these issues from a very long time. And especially this 1990 year was emphasized by the speakers in the previous session. Because Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it started coming out with these assessment reports, which highlights the science behind climate change. So it's like thousands of researchers across the world working on different aspects related to climate change. They contribute their research in journals, in scientific publications, and then these scientific publications are again assessed, and the information from these publications are collated in the IPCC report, along with additional work that gets into preparation of these assessment reports that are then published for the entire world to read. And then especially it has a section for policymakers, which highlights that what needs to be done, or what the science says about what the research says about climate change impacts that are going to happen. Now, the research part is not just limited to what is the possible impact of climate change on a particular sector, on humanity at large. It also looks into what needs to be done. So what action is required to reduce those emissions, which sectors are emitting how much greenhouse gases, and how those emissions can be reduced over a particular time frame. And what has happened that despite several warnings, I would say, in these assessment reports, and despite the science being very clear that climate change is because of human interventions, the response has been not adequate because there are several challenges related to technology, financing, and implementation capacities, which limit the implementation of both adaptation as well as mitigation measures. So without taking too much of
Jay, there's a request if Dr. Ritu could come in first, please, if it's fine with Dr. Indu.
Okay. So yeah, Dr. Indo, is it fine if we can start with Dr. Ritu Mathur?
Sure, Jay. No issues.
Thank you so much. Thanks. Okay, so maybe a brief introduction about Dr. Ritu Mathur. She's Director, Integrated Assessment and Modeling at TERI. And she's also associated with the TERI School of Advanced Studies as an adjunct faculty in the Department of Energy and Environment. She's an economist by training. She has completed her PhD in energy science from Kyoto University. And she has been working in the field of sustainable development, energy security, climate change mitigation for around 2 decades, more than 2 decades. She's also associated with IPCC process as a lead author and reviewer across different reports, and is part of the global network of integrated assessment modelers contributing to scenario building related to climate change mitigation. So at the country level, some of her main contributions have been towards providing policy inputs for India's NDC, the National Action Plan on Climate Change, and energy plans. Over the last few years, her work has focused on examining energy efficiency prospects across sectors and studying possibility of clean power generation and decarbonization. So I would like to hand over to Dr. Ritu Mathur for her presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jay. So I don't have a presentation. I'll just talk about the issue. And I'm very happy to be here. And also thanks to Indu for letting me go first. Sorry, but I had another panel to also join shortly. Basically, I think it's a very interesting topic that we have on hand today in terms of whether we do listen to science. And as Jay mentioned, there have been studies in the last few years, and which the IPCC has also more recently been compiling to see where we have progressed. And I think it's more or less now well understood that the proportion of the challenge is quite grave, and that we all need to work towards taking much stronger actions with regard to climate change. So I'm going to not dwell on the impacts, which Indu, of course, is the expert and will bring in the kind of implications of climate change into the debate. But looking at these massive kinds of repercussions that are imminent, it also calls on all of us to take stronger and deeper action as we move ahead. So with that, are we doing enough, and what is it that we need to learn is basically something that I wanted to bring to all of us in terms of this discussion. So firstly, I mean, we often hear that we are not doing enough and nothing seems to be moving. I would like to take a little bit more of an ambitious, or a non-pessimistic kind of an approach here. And I would say that it's not that nothing has moved. The challenge itself is fairly difficult to address. And therefore, whatever we may be doing may just be keeping us ahead of the problem to keep going along with it. And of course, we need to intensify these impacts. But I think even with the Paris Agreement, getting all the parties together to sign up and put forward the NDCs itself had been a great step. And why do we need to therefore, bring in actions? Why do we need to bring in these collective set of responsibilities itself is first an important thing to understand. I think when we bring together, countries or parties to say, what is it that we want to do? In a way, we are also putting down a roadmap or a certain goal in terms of where we want to progress. And this itself can help us see where globally we may be moving together, what more can we do, how well we are being able to track ourselves, where do we think we can learn from others, how much more can be done across sectors, and what are the kinds of things that others are doing. So it throws open an entire body of knowledge in terms of knowing more about what can be done, how it can be done better, and how others may be doing it better. So it's not that, even if we are not achieving as much as we had thought out that we should, that there's absolutely no progress. If also we look at it from different kinds of dimensions, whether it is with regard to how much or what we do across sectors, or whether it is with regard to who the actors are, I would say that there have been progress of different kinds. One, let's come back to the number of actors. I think we are seeing increasingly larger and larger number of companies and corporates joining in the mission and saying we are ready to move towards a net zero company, or we are ready to take stronger action, because they also want to be part of the game. They want to be part of the solution, and for good reasons. If companies can be front runners and they can increase their profitability or not get locked into technologies or processes which may not be those of the future, these are gains for companies themselves. So people are starting to join the bandwagon, even if they are corporates or profit-making entities. There are governments which, of course, have come on board by signing these NDCs and other treaties. There are the youth, such as all of you, who again have a much higher level of awareness today about the problem, but also are engaged in conversations about this, are thinking more about solutions. And I think every part of our society is beginning to see what they can do as individuals. This itself is, I think, a move in the correct direction, whether it is in terms of thinking about whether you should be vegan, whether you should use less packaging, whether you should move away from plastics, whether you should have less wastage, whether you should use energy or water more efficiently. I think it's getting ingrained into different sections of society, and that itself, I would say, is a good step in furthering what we can do and how each one of us can play a role in doing more in terms of action. Also, apart from spreading action across actors and across multiple stakeholder groups, climate change also needs to resonate with our values, with our aspirations, with our development needs, and so on. And again, when we look at methods, when we look at how policymakers or stakeholders are formulating decisions, we are increasingly seeing that people are integrating the multiple aspects of what they must do in order to do more. So again, that is something in the correct direction to sort of move towards looking at multiple objectives, such as in case of India, looking at promoting employment and promoting the number of jobs that we can develop and bring into the society, looking at the amount of value addition you could do across the entire chain when you are moving towards a low carbon option, or looking at ways to provide better access to energy and so on. So I think there are a number of things which can be done and which have been increasingly focused on. But of course, I mean, all the numbers do also tell us that we are still very far away from where science tells us we must be. So the key thing here is to therefore pick up the success stories, look at ways in which we can scale up, and in terms of being able to do more, all of us collectively need to therefore look at how we can broaden and how we can deepen the actions that we are trying to do. So by broadening, I mean doing many more kinds of things simultaneously, and by deepening, I mean we need to do much more in terms of moving towards a decarbonized economy. So I think if all of us collectively focus on looking at opportunities and looking at innovative ways in which we can broaden and deepen the decarbonization actions, the science tells us that the window is still not closed. And with that, I would like to leave this optimism with us in terms of saying that the space still exists. We just need to accelerate our efforts and accelerate our actions in moving towards what needs to be done collectively at the global level, and with that, we would together be able to be a greater part of the solution of what is required to address climate change. So with that, I would stop with this initial remarks. If there are questions, we could come back to it.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Ritu Mathur, for this very positive and optimistic take on the mitigation aspects. And it's true that a lot is pending, but of course, we are going in the right direction in terms of the effort being put. So now, brief about Dr. Indu Murthy. So Dr. Indu Murthy is the principal research scientist in adaptation and risk analysis team at CEEW. She has completed her bachelor's in botany from Ethiraj College for Women, Chennai, and master's in botany from MS University, Baroda, with a specialization in forestry and environment. And she holds a PhD in ecology and environmental sciences from Pondicherry University. Prior to joining CEEW, she worked as a consultant scientist at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and her areas of interest include climate change vulnerability, land-based mitigation, adaptation, resilience building, climate proofing, development to climate change. Dr. Indu Murthy is on the governing board of South Asia Consortium for Interdisciplinary Water Resources Study, Saki Waters. She's an expert with the UNFCCC roster of experts for India for GHG inventory, greenhouse gas inventories. And she's the member of the Red Plus cell constituted by Government of Karnataka. She's also an academic editor for PLOS One editorial board and a member of the Technical Advisory Committee of Mahila Abhiruddhi Society, Andhra Pradesh, APMAS. So, Dr. Indu Murthy, we look forward to your presentation on vulnerability issues and adaptation issues related to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jay, and very good afternoon to everyone here. I have a short presentation, so I'll just quickly share my screen and walk you through this. Of course, one good thing of coming in a little late in any panel is that you will have a lot of the basic points covered by many of the speakers before us. So that gives me an advantage to speak about the crux of the issue itself. Of course, just to kind of set the context, I would just be touching upon a few things, of course. As it's been very clearly laid out and established by during the introductory panel and also by Ritu, who spoke just before me, it's not like there's nothing happening with respect to addressing climate change. There is something that's happening, but there's still a slight gap which exists there. And it is applicable to all areas of climate change, which is what we're going to be talking about. Ritu already spoke about mitigation, which is to do with reducing the emissions, changing our development trajectory, so on and so forth. Now, all of these, of course, as we know, as the British, from the British High Commission, as he stated, it is very clear that it all started with, in the 1990s. He said he was 23, but then even now, there is much to be done. Now, the IPCC follows a 6-year cycle, and so obviously, it's a long time for the world to have changed the way we live. There have been changes, but there is much more to be done, is the clear message that's been coming out from all the speakers who we heard before me. So what is it that these reports have been telling with respect to the science itself or with respect to India? Let's look at the latest assessment report, that is the 6th assessment report. Of course, only the first working group, the working group 1 report has been released. The ones on what we call as mitigation and the other on adaptation, impacts and adaptation will be released early next year. But before we even get there, let's look at what are the physical changes that are likely to happen, the kind of findings that this report is talking about. Some big messages. It very clearly states that because of increasing heat, there could be a push up for the Indian monsoon, which means an increase in the Indian monsoon. That sounds like a good news at the first instance, because more rainfall, obviously more water in the environment. But the problem is the exact nature of the monsoon in the near future is uncertain. It's going to be highly variable. Now, the minute we talk about variability, we are talking about, maybe extreme events on the rise, which means increase in the intensity as well as frequency of hot extremes. We are talking about heat events, which is more warmer days and nights, and heat waves also, which the country has been, many states have already reported in the past summer, and moving forward, we might even hear more about them. And of course, decrease in the intensity or frequency of cold extremes. Interestingly, they're also talking about increase in extreme rainfall events, which means we're talking about heavy intensity, high intensity rainfall events, which could happen. So obviously, you have this distribution extremely skewed. It's not going to be normally distributed. So obviously, it's not good news. So when you have heavy rainfall events, the related impact is we are looking at flooding events, potential damage to, of course, people, lives, livelihoods, and of course, even infrastructure if they are extremely high rainfall events. Landslides, for instance. I mean, we've been reading about these in the newspapers, even in the past few months. So obviously, more and more of these are going to become the new normal. So which is a cause of concern in itself. And the MOEFCC, the way the findings talk about it, also says that cities are going to be affected by more rain, sea level rise, and heat. I'm sure people who live in the different metros, we all know that, although our cities are clean and green in the, in the heart of the city, but we all know that there are certain localities which perpetually, year after year, have flooding issues, or, there are other related issues with respect to increased rainfall. And those which are close to the coast are grappling with issues of sea level rise. Now, sea level rise, of course, it might seem like a very far into the future, but then when we go into the coast, when you talk to the people, you will understand the kind of changes that are already happening and also the kind of issues that people are facing as a result of such changes in sea level rise. Now, at the face value, it's just, okay, maybe the coast, the people near the coast could be impacted is what we think. But however, when the change is very large, what we are also looking at is saltwater intrusion into the groundwater aquifers, which means the water that is available even in the inland could become saline, which means it becomes unfit for irrigation purposes, drinking purposes, and a whole lot of other issues stem because of that reason. Now, the most important finding, as we've been experiencing, but then it very clearly highlights, is this, that there are compounding climate drivers will multiply disasters, which means to say we are not looking at a single climate hazard for a single region at any given point in time. A particular district could grapple with both kinds of extremes. It could be a heat wave during summer and a heavy rainfall even during the monsoon season. So which means all of these together could interplay, and because of extreme heat, there could be water scarcity, and then a whole lot of trickle effects, as they call the cascading impacts of such changes are so large that we might end up having multiple disasters that are going to be very hard to grapple with. So all of these definitely kind of highlight that we are moving into a very uncertain future, and there is a need to kind of change the way we manage our systems, be it the different sectors that we are talking about, or even change the way we live itself, as Ritu rightly pointed out. So in short, the climate is changing. It's here and now, and it's caused mainly by humans. Anthropogenic climate change is something that's been very clearly established. Now just look at this graph out here. I mean, this is a 1,000-year plot. What you see here is, how consumption of fossil fuels have changed, land use change has happened, atmospheric CO2 concentration has changed over this period. And what you see very clearly is they're following almost the same trajectory. I mean, the path is almost the same. It can't be coincidence. Three different unconnected things, as it seems, but not really unconnected. When you look at it from the perspective of climate change, they all follow a similar path. And what you see is that beyond 1960, that's more or less the Industrial Revolution and beyond, when you see a huge jump in the way the systems have reacted. Now, this very clearly establishes more than anything that, yes, what activities humans have carried out on the Earth surface are one of the reasons, definitely a large reason for the changes to set in. And as I already said, the extreme weather will continue and it'll get worse. So we are at a risk of basically pushing the climate system towards abrupt, unpredictable, and potentially irreversible changes with highly damaging impacts. Now, when we are talking about abrupt changes, people talk about the tipping points, as they call it. If you cross a certain point, then there could be, extinction of certain species could happen. Then the Indian monsoon could collapse, which is something you and I can't imagine, because if the Indian monsoon collapses, right from food production to water supply, everything is going to be impacted. So there are potentially large impacts that we are looking at. So I think we have crossed very clearly through the different assessment reports of the IPCC. The question is no more, do we believe in climate science? Yes, everybody believes in it. And there is clearly established evidence that climate change is a reality. The question now is, why should we act and how should we act? Right? So that's the question in front of us. So given that more and more countries and even different stakeholders, even within countries like the corporates, the companies, or even, of course, government policy makers, district authorities are all kind of trying to see how best they can act together. So now moving forward, we have 4 different classes of people. If you look at a group, mixed group of, reaction to a single event, we all say that climate change is a reality. But however, we also know that in reality, there are still people who might even question, okay, is this really so? Although there is enough science, right? Or there is an extreme where who all believe in science, like people like me and you and me believe in science. And also, although people believe in science, there are people who are delaying action because of certain reasons. And there are a whole lot of other people who are committed to action. So you have these 4 buckets of groups which are sitting there, some with doubt, so obviously not any action, some who have accepted but still are not acting because they think it's far into the future, it's not going to impact. Why should we worry about it today? However, the reality, as science has been very clearly established, is that it's happening already. We are experiencing it, and it's just going to become worse as we move forward. Now, despite knowing that addressing climate change is basically a smart risk management, kind of a measure that can be taken, primarily because it's good for the economy, it's good for our health as well. And the sooner we act, lower is going to be the risk and the cost. And there is much we can do, because we are also the reason behind why this change is happening at a much faster rate than it historically happened. So people can say, okay, it might be the natural cycle. Yes, no one is saying no to it totally. However, the problem or the issue that's quite startling is the fact that the rate at which this change is happening is unprecedented. And there is no way systems, organisms, people can cope with the kind of changes that we are seeing and which is likely to happen if enough action is not taken. So what have we done? I know there is a dedicated session through the day where people are going to talk about different issues as to what Government of India has been doing with respect to that. So now I'm not going to get into the details of it, obviously. But then we know that it's a 2-pronged approach. Now, one thing we need to realize is that it's not this or that. Both needs to be done. So if you're mitigating, if you're reducing the flow of greenhouse gases by switching to, say, energy efficient measures or doing a whole lot of other decarbonization measures that you're roping in, be it in industries, be it in the energy sector, or be it in the building sector, but you still need to do a bit of adaptation. Now, of course, in mitigation, there's this other set of mitigation activities, which is increasing the storage of carbon. We're talking about carbon sinks, which is increasing the forest cover. Now, we have dedicated programs. Our minister also talked about it as to how India is looking at these issues in its commitment towards the nationally determined contribution, or the NDC, under the Paris Agreement. Now, a whole lot of things are being done here, but at the same time, why we need to adapt is for the fact that even if the world decides that there's not going to be any major change in, or release more gases into the atmosphere, it's a very imaginary kind of a situation. It's an imaginary future that we are talking about. But even if that happens, there is already a whole lot of greenhouse gases out there in the atmosphere, which is going to bring in some change. This is called as committed climate change. So even then, there is some amount of change that's going to happen with the climate system, which is going to impact, organisms or different sectors. So obviously, adaptation is something that needs to be done. So you can't ignore that. While mitigation is a global, issue or a problem that's being tackled at the global level, adaptation is a more local issue, and there is a whole lot of local flavor that comes in the minute you start talking about vulnerability, adaptation, so on and so forth. Now, when you look at it from an Indian context, denying climate change obviously is no more a choice. And why we are talking about adaptation is for the basic reason that India has a very large population which is dependent on climate sensitive sectors. We are talking about highly vulnerable sectors like, maybe rain-fed or dryland agriculture. We have a long coastline. So coastal fisheries is important. We have forest ecosystems. We have 2 biodiversity hotspots in the Western Ghats and in the northeastern region. So with all of these are all extremely climate sensitive sectors. Any changes in the rainfall pattern, any changes in the temperature are going to have impacts on this. Agriculture, of course, is something, year to year, season to season, any change, we know it's going to impact it quite adversely. And of course, we are already seeing it. We know for a fact that farmers, mountain communities, and fishermen are grappling with issues of drought, deficit rainfall, unseasonal rainfall. I mean, they might have a timely onset of monsoon, they might do a sowing, everything, but at the end of it, there is one unseasonal rainfall. It could lead to a loss of the produce that they are ready to harvest. So, I mean, given these multiple issues, we don't have a choice but to do adaptation. Now, of course, with climate change, all of these are going to be much, much more. So given this, I think the time for discussion of whether we need to act fast is long gone. And I think we need to recognize that it's a simple risk-reward equation. You address the risks, we see the risks much more clearer. So we address it, we have rewards at the end of it. So the new form of denial, of course, more and more, I'm not talking just about India, worldwide, is that, it's way too expensive to do anything. So of course, which is true, especially in countries like India who haven't had a role in the actual emissions increasing in a certain way. It's because of XYZ countries who have emitted in the past. We are facing the brunt of it. However, the problem is, we cannot sit back and say, sorry, we are not the culprits. We won't do anything, primarily because we have a vulnerable population. We have vulnerable sectors. So the entire world needs to do, which is what Government of India is trying to push for through all the climate negotiations. It's been pushing for climate action that is just. So which is very, very important in this context. So obviously we will need to kind of take into cognizance the science behind these changes. So if we get them in the right place, obviously we can act better. And as Jay did point out in the beginning, there are multiple challenges the minute we talk about climate change, addressing climate change, be it mitigation, be it adaptation. Now, when you think about adaptation, of course, as I said, the challenges are slightly very different as compared to mitigation. Of course, climate finance is at the heart of both mitigation and adaptation. I mean, you need money. If you have to transition to cleaner pathways, it costs. Now, who's going to bear the cost? India might do it, say, 60 years or 80 years down the lane. But if we have to do it in the next 30 years, you need the upfront cost. So that's what climate finance is all about. Now, however, if you have to do adaptation locally, one thing, of course, that's very important, which I would like to point out here, is that a lot of the developmental programs that we are implementing in India are addressing climate change in one way or the other. But however, it's not intentional, it's just incidental at the end of the day. So there is a need to mainstream. So if you have to mainstream and bring into center stage the issue of climate change adaptation, you need data at scales, specific scales. It could be a district scale, a sub-district scale, or any scale which requires adaptation, right? Or for a particular sector. Now, another thing is about communication of science itself. Now, we do know, many of you, when you read certain reports, climate scientists, we have this habit of saying, okay, increase in sea level is very likely with a 95% confidence interval. Now, for a non-science person, this doesn't really convey the gravity of the situation. But what's actually being said is that nothing about the future is 100% clear, but seriously, this is going to happen. So there is a need to act now. So that's the key message. So I think we need more and more of science communicators, which requires interdisciplinary, cross-sectoral talk and cohesive ideation, planning, and implementation, which is where I think youth have a large role to play. I think you can bring about the practice of interdisciplinary research. It is happening. I'm not saying it's not happening, but there's more that still needs to be done. So I think with this, I will conclude. And I do see a very large role for youth to take this message forward and bring in a cohesiveness in the way we ideate itself with respect to an issue, rather than looking at these in isolation, in silos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Indu Murthy. And actually, we have a lot of youth attending this conclave, and the plan is that there are 2 questions that have been shortlisted by TERI team. So I would hand over to Taru for sharing the questions or inviting the students who are going to ask the question.
Thank you to Jay, Dr. Indu, and Dr. Ritu for having such an intriguing session. We now move on to the youth interview session. I'm proud to introduce our 2 young environmentalists, Ms. Apna Chandra and Ms. Aparna Chaudhary, who have taken extraordinary steps towards climate action. These stalwarts are with us since the first edition of Youth Climate Conclave and are now invited to moderate the today's session. So over to you, Asta and Aparna. Please raise your questions to the speakers. And I am not sure if Dr. Mathur, Dr. Ritu is still there, but I'm sure Jay and Dr. Indu would be glad to take up the session. So over to you.
Thank you, Tarun ma'am, for the introduction. It feels great to be back here. And thank you, Dr. Indu ma'am, for your insightful words. It was really informative. My first question is that what is the impact of the pandemic on the global greenhouse gas emissions? I mean, how has pandemic impacted the overall nature of greenhouse gas emissions?
Ritu isn't here, Jay?
No, I think she had to leave for another meeting. They're slightly delayed overall in the agenda.
Okay, no issues. So I'll take it then, right? So yeah, with respect to greenhouse gas emissions, because of the pandemic, yes, there was a temporary lull. I mean, there was a slight decline. But however, people kind of, there are a whole lot of studies, news articles around that. Because of the pandemic, there was a dip. However, it's not all good news because, people were waiting for the pandemic to kind of, take a backseat or subside. And then it's in a full gear, people are kind of pushing into recovery. Now, this recovery, of course, countries around the world are trying to push for a green recovery. But however, it's not very easy. Let's face it, not every country can do that. And it could be part this, part that. So it was a temporary lag is all I could say, all I will say. So it's not a good news at the end of the line, of course.
All right. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Before moving on to the next question, I would request the attendees, all the participants, so if you all also have any questions, please write it in the chat box. We will be able to moderate few more questions after Astha and Aparna finishes. So please feel free to write in the chat box. Go ahead, Aparna.
Okay, so my next question is my favorite question right now. So the next question is, it's open to both of you. What are the impacts on developing countries, and within countries, what are the impacts on people who are living below the poverty line due to the pandemic and policies of climate change? So to make it more crisp, the question is that how are policies on climate change and policies related to the pandemic affecting people living below the poverty line and who are vulnerable to these impacts?
Okay. So, I mean, like I said, climate change, especially when we are talking about vulnerabilities, now it's not even. Country to country, it's different, but even within a country, across states, even within states, across districts, even within a city, across different localities, it could be very different. Now, unfortunately, when we all know that the pandemic impacted these people who are in the lower rung of the ladder very, very seriously, and it was very adverse. Particularly, people who had to migrate, the laborer category, who had to migrate, travel long distances. So I think the impact was extremely large. I would say it was heartbreaking to see news of those. But the reality is, climate change, if we do not act today, could push us into the same position. So that's why worldwide people have been looking at this pandemic as hopefully a lesson which will push countries to develop policies which keep in mind just transitions and how do you address equity issues with respect to addressing the different categories of people, which is why the state action plans are coming into play here. Now the state action plans look at the vulnerability profiles and they develop action plans, right? So given that it looks at mitigation and adaptation, the ideal situation is for the states to take into account the vulnerabilities and then come up with plans. Obviously, you can't put together locality-wise plans. There has to be a master plan with scope for doing all that is required to address the differential impacts that the different sectors of populations are likely to face. So there is a possibility to do it. There is some understanding of that, but there is a lot more to be done.
All right. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Is Astha there in the call?
Hi, yes. Hello?
Yeah, okay. Over to you, Astha.
Astha, can you come on the camera, please? If that's possible.
Yes, just give me a moment. Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Astha Chandra, and I'm here today as a youth representative. At the onset, first of all, let me congratulate all the speakers. I'd really like to thank Manju and everyone who has spoken at the session today, especially on climate science, adaptation and mitigation, and all of the nitty-gritties of the climate movement that we have been having so far. The question that I'd like to pose to you is, although the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned us back in 1990 about the alarming levels of global warming and the impact it will have on the future climate and the environment, there still seems to be negotiations ongoing to build a global response to climate change. Could you please elaborate on why there seems to be a time lag before our global community gears up to take the required actions?
So this, Astha, as I already said, call it the politics of climate change to begin with. But I think more importantly, what we should understand is that it's easier said than done. Policies, and especially for developing countries, there is so much that needs to be done before looking at the problem of climate change itself, mitigation specifically, right? So, and the climate finance that's required to transition is, it's very steep. So you can't jump from here to here without a cost. It is at a cost. So now the cost is something that many countries around the world are grappling with, which is why there is a need for negotiations, and which is why people are trying to come up with ways in which, the negotiations kind of look at a single goal, but at the same time, parties have different roles and responsibilities. So given that different countries have had a different role to play in the way the emissions are today. So which is why, think of your own college, certain elections for that matter. There is never a consensus. So many countries reaching the consensus, it's very hard to come by. So there is action. It's slow, but we are moving in the right direction is all I would say.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. The other question that I'd like to put forward is, and I know it is a very simple sounding and maybe a very visceral question, but I think it is at the core of our climate movement. What, according to you, can be done to ensure that science and our scientists are better listened to? Because that is where the facts and the information comes from, and the society needs to absorb it as much as possible for us to understand the situation.
So I think, as I said, communication of science is a gap area, a gray area, I would say. I've been a scientist for more than 2 decades myself, and I know, there is a problem with the way we communicate science. So I think we really need to transition to areas, which is why I said, we need people who can act as those communicators, right? So there is a need for more and more people who are like the bridge between the policymaker and the people who generate the science. So we need more people getting into that particular space. Now, see, it's like I said, the example that I gave you, right? So which said, 95% confidence, and it's possible, likely, unlikely, and all these things. It makes it a little complex. But then when we deal with science, we have to say that, because certainty becomes very hard to come by in science. So, science is evolving, models are evolving. So obviously we cannot say with certainty that this is going to happen. So given that, scientists make those statements. But however, I think scientists can play a larger role and become, thought leaders, I can say, by trying to get into that space of communicating with different stakeholders in the language they understand. So which means, for instance, if I'm talking to, let's say, an industrialist, a corporate body, what makes sense to them as businesses at the end of the day? So I need to translate, okay, because of this temperature change, like for instance, if we are talking about some systems which are dependent on, say, soil water availability, for instance. So in such a case, okay, because of heat events, water availability is going to be impacted, which means your systems are going to be impacted. Your, output, productivity levels are going to come down. So then it makes business sense to him to see, okay, how do I tweak it? How do I address it? Or even when somebody is building a dam, right? You need to say your investment is at stake. X number of people's lives are going to be translated. Now in adaptation, the problem is with the metrics. Measuring the impact is very hard because it's varied across spatial scales. It's varied across different categories of people, which is what is the biggest challenge, I would say, when we're talking about adaptation. Mitigation is slightly better because, it's about, changing an incandescent bulb to a LED bulb. Okay, I save so much, I transition. That's much easier. But here we're dealing with the natural systems, we are dealing with people, we are dealing with impacts. So all of this make it a little intangible, but it's difficult, but it's definitely possible. And there are more and more people who are trying to do this in the years. In the past few years, I've seen more and more people coming into the space where they are communicating science better, even scientists, so to say. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, for taking all the answers. And thank you, Astha and Aparna, for anchoring the Q&A session. There are actually a lot of questions on the chat, and we've taken a note of those. We will be answering to your questions individually, but moving on with the session, we now have the quiz and request the event cell to please, put the questions on the screen. So there'll be 5 questions, depending upon, depending upon the theme, and you have to choose the correct answer. And then we'll see whether you have attended the session properly or not. And can we also have the e-banner of Youth Climate Conclave, please?
Terry, can you see it?
Yes, it's loading. Those, I can see several windows opening. Is that how it is?
Yes. Can we go next?
Yes. Which of the following gases doesn't transmit? Options are you. Jose, can we move to the next question? Okay, I think even I can do it. Which of these greenhouse gases is most abundant in the atmosphere? Jose, when can we see the results?
Taru, individual results we can see just after taking the quiz.
Okay. Which greenhouse gas has the highest global warming potential?
अच्छा
ये पैनलिस्ट
वाला
हाँ तो ठीक है जो एक काम कर रहा है वही काफी है हाँ उसी से कर रहा है
Please mute the mic. Question number 4. Which greenhouse gas is emitted due to landfilling of municipal solid waste? Climate change may have an impact on the following. I hope the questions are visible to all of you. So this was the last question on the quiz. Jose, can we have the results now? Or if it's not happening, then probably we can move to the next session. We are running out of time.
Taru, we can share the screen where you can see the results.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Sonali, here we are getting individual results. Which is fine. We can scroll down later.
Okay, please.
We now move on to the presentation of Maharashtra State Nodal Agency for Eco Club activities. These Eco Clubs are part of the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change initiative with Eco Clubs. I request Ms. Pramila More, RFO Headquarters, Social Forestry, Maharashtra, to please deliver the presentation. Over to you, ma'am.
Taru, actually there's a request to unmute from PCCF SFD Pune.
We have made a presenter.
Sonali?
Can somebody?
Can you,
yeah, okay.
Sonali?
Yeah.
Can you give speaking rights to? Okay. Thanks.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me, sir? Yes, we can hear you. Okay. Good evening, all. Myself, Pramila More, presenting activities carried out in Maharashtra under the Youth Climate Conclave 2021 by Eco Club Schools. Next. various addressing the issues of climate change and environment are carried out. Some of them are summarized here shortly due to the time limit. First one is the webinars. We organized a webinar for students and teachers on the topic eco-restoration, in which 300 eco-club schools and forest officers participated. Then tight thermoplastic challenge, in which 104 eco-club teachers participated. Then conservation education, the webinar conducted by the forest education training, Dehradun, in which eco-club teachers participated. Then we conducted eco-friendly nest preparation for birds, in which 250 eco-clubs participated.
And the slides are not changing, sorry. Can you change the slide?
We are changing slides, sir. These are some photographs of the programs we conducted. Next one. Next program is the cleaning of wetlands and water bodies, to surrounding of the water bodies to make it plastic free. We conducted a drive in which cleaning of the wetlands and water bodies conducted. Next one is the biodiversity awareness, to aware students, villagers about the biodiversity and its importance and its conservation, trail organized in the Vetal Hill district, Pune. Next one is the celebration of Ganesh Festival eco-friendly. Recently, Ganesh Festival is celebrated, in which the Eco Club students participated in making Ganesh murtis and adults. In addition to this, avoiding use of thermocol and plastic for decoration. Some of the pictures of making Ganesh murti are here presenting. Next one. Then we organized a webinar on the eco-friendly nest preparation for the birds. Regarding this, we now organized a competition on eco-friendly artificial nest preparation for birds. This competition is carried out in 2 steps, in which first step consists of students will prepare nest.
Pramila ma'am?
Yes, ma'am.
Your slides are not moving. Can you please, change your slides also?
Yes, ma'am, I'm sharing it.
Ma'am, please reshare it. The slides are not changing at our end, ma'am.
Reshare. Okay, madam. The slides are visible now?
Only first slide.
Next slide. Next slide. Now? Second slide. It's second slide. Next
Ma'am,
slide.
full screen kar dijiye, ma'am.
Full screen.
Now it's changing. Put in the full screen.
Next slide. Now it's visible?
Yes, it is changing now. Please press.
Oh, okay. We are here. Eco-friendly nest preparation. Next slide. Competition on eco-friendly artificial nest preparation for birds. Competition is carried on in 2 steps. First one is the students will prepare a nest and uploaded photographs on Google link which we provided. Second step includes the uploading of photographs in which birds get along with that artificial nest, lay eggs or resides there. Next one is the seed ball distribution at village level, in which seed ball distributed to the villagers for planting activities. Then bird watching program is carried out. Next one. Then celebration of various days according to the calendar of environment by organizing various awareness activities, in which World Water Day was celebrated on 22nd March, in which the oath is taken by the eco clubs for sustainable use of water bodies and save water campaign is carried out. Then World Environment Day, 5th of June, in which planting trees, drawing competition, free distribution of seedling to villagers, Vrikshalindi was carried out. an Independence Day Rangoli competition, drawing competition on the theme use of waste paper material and save water and save nature is carried out. Then International Ozone Day was celebrated on 16th of September. English drawing competition, essay competition on the topic Protect Your Mother Earth was carried out. Next one. These are some photographs which are the activities carried out. Plantation drive, World Water Day, drawing competition, Rangoli competition. Then here is ma'am, there is a video clip of about 3 minutes and 30 seconds prepared by a 10 student. If you permit me, I will present it.
Respected Principal Ma'am, venerable all teachers, and my dear friends. I am Emily Soni from 10th grade. Today, I shall talk about ozone layer. But first of all, wish you very happy ozone day to all of you. Earth without ozone is like house without roof. As we know, that World Ozone Day is celebrated on 16th September every year. In 1994, September 16th was designated as World Ozone Day by United Nations General Assembly. Since then, 16th September is celebrated as World Ozone Day each year. World Ozone Day marks the importance and role of the ozone layer in the environment. On this day, numerous activities and programs are being held in order to spread awareness about the importance of ozone layer and also the depletion of ozone layer and how to protect it. Ozone is a trioxygen inorganic molecule having the conjugate smell and is of a pale blue color. The formula for ozone is O3, which means trioxygen. The molecules can bend and form a protective layer around the Earth. Ozone layer protects Earth from ultraviolet rays, which are very harmful and dangerous. But nowadays, due to excessive use of chlorofluorocarbons in our daily life, the ozone layer is depleting, which may harm to our Earth and there will also have a negative impact on our lives. Chlorofluorocarbons are mainly used in refrigerators and air conditioners. According to the research of the scientists, it has been proved that hydrofluorocarbons are less dangerous than chlorofluorocarbons, and the depletion of ozone layer has been reduced with the help of using hydrofluorocarbons instead of chlorofluorocarbons. It has been observed that hydrofluorocarbons have zero ozone depletion potential. World Ozone Day is celebrated at both national and international levels. The governments of different countries conduct various programs and seminars in order to make people aware about the depletion of ozone layer and also tell the people the importance of environmentally friendly products and tell them to use eco-friendly and ozone protective products. Various types of activities, competitions such as poster making, sketching, the act related to ozone layer depletion, debate and speeches are held in schools and collected in order to make the students aware about the depletion of ozone layer and how to protect it using eco-friendly and ozone protective products. Devices containing chlorofluorocarbons are already banned in many countries. It is also hoped that most countries in the world are partners in the agreement to reduce ozone depleting emissions. Nowadays, more people are adopting eco-friendly lifestyle approaches. Let us see all this as a good human and let us work better. So let's take a resolution that we will use eco-friendly products and plant more trees to protect ozone layer and save our Earth. And at last, I would like to thanks to all of you that giving me this opportunity here, and especially thanks to my class teacher Kitki Kulkarni ma'am for guidance to complete this video. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your input.
Thank you.
We now move on to session 2 of the day. The discussion will revolve around We Are the World's Ocean. The speaker moderator for the session is Professor R.R. Rashmi, Distinguished Fellow Resource Efficiency and Governance TERI. The speakers for the sessions are Professor T. Jayaraman, Senior Fellow, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, and Professor Joyita Gupta, Faculty of Social and Behavioral Sciences, University of Amsterdam, and Professor Rosemary R. Delbecque, European University Institute. Requesting Professor Rashmi to please initiate the discussion.
Thank you, Taru. And very good afternoon, good morning, depending on where we are. Let me welcome all the panelists and once again convey our best wishes to the young participants in today's webinar. Today we will be talking about some of the questions concerning the climate change discourse that we have in the country and at the global level. And this is an old question. Climate change is dominating the conversation these days in every forum. You all might have been told that in a matter of 1.5 months, all the big leaders of the world will be congregating in Glasgow in the UK to discuss the future of the actions to be taken to address climate change and how we can prevent its adverse effects on our community, on our economic system, and on our geography and different regions and countries. So this is an important issue that is being discussed today, but it has much wider connotations. It is not just an environmental problem. It is a much larger problem, which is rooted in history, economics, there is politics, and there are a number of social issues around this. So it will be an interesting discussion. And today we are here with some of the top-ranking intellectuals and professors and people who have devoted their life to discussing and analyzing these issues. So they will talk to you about this. I have I can see Dr. Joyita Gupta from the Faculty of Social and Behavioral Sciences, University of Amsterdam. I am not sure if Dr. T. Jayaraman has joined us.
Yeah, Mr. Rashmi.
Yes, welcome. If you can switch on your camera, it will be great, Dr. Jayaraman.
I believe I am on, so maybe it's not showing on your screen.
Okay, yes. Yes. Thank you. I hope you will be visible to everyone soon.
Yes.
But anyway, I mean, you can always work like an oracle and in the background. Dr. Jayaraman is a senior fellow of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, and he is one of the major intellectuals here who have done a lot of research on climate change emission-related issues. So I'm sure his insights will be extremely useful to you. I have Professor Jos Delbecque from the European University Institute. Dr. Delbecque, are you on the?
I think, yeah. I hope
wonderful.
you see me and you hear me. It's a real pleasure to work with you again,
Yes.
Dr. Rashmi.
Welcome once again, and great to welcome you to this discussion. And Dr. Delbecque, again, he's doesn't need any introduction. He's one of the, he has been in the European Commission, and now he's of course working on the academic side. So he has seen both worlds. He has done the policy work in the European Commission, and today he's working on the academic side. So let me, without without wasting further time, let me introduce you to the key issues that our panelists will address today. The way Livleen framed the discussion today was about international cooperation. And I think climate change is essentially an issue of international cooperation. If we really want to resolve this issue, it cannot be resolved without all countries of the world acting together and seeing this as one major common problem facing the humanity. Of course, the kinds of actions which different countries and different communities take will have to be different, because each of them are have a different background. They have their economic conditions are different, their social capacities are different, the national circumstances are different. So the responses and the nature of actions will always be different. But the essential point is that we must all see this as one common problem facing the entire world, and all of us need to be determined. So the question is, some of the questions which the organizers had put to us is, what are the most important steps which developed countries and the developing countries can take to come together to resolve this problem in the negotiations or outside the negotiations. Second question was, how can the developed countries contribute to building capacity in the developing countries to resolve climate change as a major problem. Third question was related to investments. What are the steps needed to increase the flow of investments in the developing countries so that these investments become economically viable, particularly in the areas of adaptation where there are no returns and where there is large funding required, where the budgets are very small. What is it that the global community can do there, in addition to what it can do in the area of energy and other economic sectors? Lastly, what is it that we can do to avoid avoid the adverse impact of climate change measures that we take on countries which have low economic capacities, or all communities which have low economic capacities. So these four questions are there, but I'm sure the panelists will have their own way of looking at things, and they will they are free to bring in their own element into the entire discussion. So let me start with Dr. Jayaraman. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rashmi. Let me just check at the outset that I am audible to you.
Yeah, you are absolutely clearly audible. Please go ahead.
Very good. Now, the next tricky move is to share my PowerPoint presentation.
And Dr. Jayaraman, if I can interrupt you at this point, I think we will have about, since we have about an hour, we will have about 8 to 10 minutes each for each of the panelists, and accordingly you can structure your presentation.
Yes. Unfortunately,
sir, let me do this for you. I can share your slides. I have them as backup. So let me share.
Please.
Yes.
Just 1 second. I have a power issue here. Yes. Can you share my screen? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I had added a couple of slides. If you can go to full screen mode. Yes. Thank you very much. So can we stay with the title slide, please? I had added a couple of slides, which unfortunately I cannot share. But there are, let me begin by thanking the organizers for this invitation. And I also am, in the presence of distinguished colleagues from India and friends from outside India. So it's a particular pleasure to be here. Let me just say that perhaps among the panelists, I probably have the least experience in terms of the number of years in which I have worked on issues related to climate. That is, in some sense, perhaps takes away a little. At the same time, I think it makes me youthful as far as climate is concerned. So I claim that I have the status of a youth member when it comes to the climate change community. Now, let me begin by pointing out something which I really think it doesn't apply only to young people. I know I am very reluctant to advise any generation, either mine or those younger. So let me say that there is something we should think about quite deeply. It has become a practice to counterpose intergenerational equity and development. A counterpose in the sense that you speak of development as intragenerational equity, an issue of inequalities, providing, as Amartya Sen would say, expanding capabilities, etc. And then you think of something more related to resources and environment as intergenerational equity. Now, what I would like you to contemplate, and I have reflect on, and I am somewhat convinced by this of late, is that in a developing country, certainly, development is intergenerational equity. If you take the millions of young people, a few billion in fact, or a few billion is an exaggeration, a few tens of millions. If you take the younger generation of our nation, they have their own aspirations and dreams. But backing them, with them, in solidarity with them, is the aspirations and dreams of their parents, of their families, of those who have gone before them. If you take the history of India's freedom struggle, whose 75th we celebrate this year, the 75th year of India's attaining independence, we were motivated not because there would be those who struggled for a better future would achieve it immediately. There was no such guarantee. And in fact, most of the freedom fighters returned to their daily toil and task in very somewhat, I would say, even dire circumstances. But nevertheless, they all went to the freedom struggle. They all joined the freedom struggle because of the aspirations that we had for the future. Development was certainly one of them. So I would say that we must begin, when we think of climate, of thinking of development as equally a question of intergenerational equity as it is that of natural resources or climate. So the second point that I must emphasize now is that there is a task that needs to be achieved. And that task is to keep the world safe by limiting temperatures to an appropriate level. And this is a target that the entire world has agreed on in the Paris Agreement. I must remind you that the target of the Paris Agreement, keeping the world safe by limiting its temperature increase, is not unambiguous. It has both 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. The target is certainly keeping well below 2 degrees and keeping to 1.5 degrees centigrade warming as an aspirational target. So this, keeping this target is the foremost issue before us. But when we think about this issue, we come to the other dimension, which the Honorable Minister himself referred to in the introduction, that sustainability has to be founded on equity and justice. An inequitable or unjust world is not a sustainable world. So if we start from the history of the 19th century through the first half of the 20th century, one of the greatest contributions that the world has had to sustainability is the independence that has been achieved by vast number of countries across the world. So we must not forget that equity and justice are at the foundation of sustainability. Now, I will address both these issues, development as intergenerational equity and sustainability as founded on equity and justice, in a very narrow, simple context. And that is the context of how we share the global atmospheric space. So can we turn to the next slide, please? So the story of how to limit temperatures in relation to emissions, we have now scientific advance that makes this very simple, very easy to comprehend, and opens the door also to an equitable and just formulation of the problem. The simple story is increase in global temperatures are proportional to the global cumulative emissions. So the temperatures have risen by 1.07 degrees centigrade from the beginning of the, say, 1850 to 2019. And this has been the consequence of something like 2,456 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. The second point, which follows very simply from this, that if you want to limit temperature to a particular target, then these cumulative emissions cannot go over a certain fixed number, give or take a little bit based on probability, a fixed number, which is the global carbon budget. This global carbon budget is like an entire commons. The global atmosphere, the global carbon budget is a commons, and the equitable sharing of the global carbon budget is the foundation of the equitable sharing of the global atmospheric commons. A very simple point which the IPCC has made clear in Working Group 1 of AR6 issued recently is that global cumulative emissions are what determine the temperature that will be reached. It is not just the achievement or timing of net zero or the peaking year alongside. Let me put it in a very simple way, which our farmers, our village folk would perhaps express it in similar terms. If you have limited amount of water in a village, earlier you had plenty, and over time, suppose the supply gets limited and you have to share, then those who were able to draw water freely are certainly a little reluctant to share. So you tell them, look, unfortunately, we have to share the water which is available. So those who are used to drawing it freely say, well, I don't know how many buckets I will take, but I know that I will switch off the tap at some point. Unfortunately, if you simply declare net zero and don't declare your cumulative emissions on reaching net zero, we are in a similar unfortunate situation. Next slide, please. So, Mr. Rashmi, when I have a minute left, you can let me know. I may even have reached it. I'm sorry. So we know quite accurately the global carbon budget, which is historical cumulative emissions plus what is left, depending on the temperature target we are able to reach. So 1.5 degrees, it is very tight, 2,956. The little more flexible if it is 1.7 degrees, and a lot more flexible, well, not that much compared to for 2 degrees. Next slide, please. But the real question is how much is left? And for 1.5 degrees, 2083% is gone, of which, and so only 17%, which is 500 gigatons remains. Next slide. With the 2 degrees centigrade, life is a little easier. So 35% remains, but remember that the bulk of the available carbon budget has already been consumed. So next slide, please. So where have the emissions gone? So who has been responsible? Now, the term common but differentiated responsibilities, I think we must remind ourselves that if you look at the what was the discussions that took place at the time of the Climate Convention, responsibility referred to both the past and the future. And we were very clear about this when the Climate Convention was signed. And you can see very clearly that the overwhelming share of the emissions are due to developed countries, Annex 1 in the language of the UNFCCC, and even in the 91-2018 period, even though the Annex 1, non-Annex 1 share looks larger, if you take out China's contribution, then the share of the rest of the world is more or less similar. Next slide, please. So here is a comparative description of the country-wide share of historical cumulative emissions. So you can see that India has an extraordinary record, that it has consumed only 4.37% of the historical cumulative emissions. It has been responsible for only 4.37%, even though it constitutes something like 18% of the global population. All non-Annex 1 countries have contributed something like only 40%, even though their share of the global population is significantly higher. Similarly, however, if you look at the picture of all developed countries, then of course the picture is completely reversed. So I think this is in many ways the point that India has always made, that this is the starting point of the story that cannot be ignored. Next slide, please.
Dr. Jaraman, you are nearly there. End of your time.
Yes, I will just wrap up in 2-3 slides. I'm almost done. So here is, of course, you can quantify what this, we can call it debt and credit, though sometimes our friends from developed countries are somewhat uncomfortable at this description. But what I would like to point out is that many of the developed countries have continued to draw this disproportionate share of the global carbon budget even after the Climate Convention was signed. Even if we ignore prior to 1990, post 1990 also there is something of an issue. Next slide, please. So the net zero targets, if you want to combine the year of net zero plus ensuring that at least the countries concerned use the remaining carbon budget, which is, of course, only a fraction of the global total carbon budget. If they have to use this in an equitable way, then the net zero targets of 2050, etc., are simply highly inadequate. So if we want to keep 1.5 degrees centigrade alive, as the Honorable President of the COP26 has often mentioned, we are certainly would be in agreement, but it cannot be done regrettably unless many countries significantly advance their net zero target dates. Next slide, please. So India's issues are clearly this, and India also, as I pointed out, for India, like many other countries in the world, development is also our right to intergenerational equity. So the problem is, the people ask, can you have net zero? Can you have a peaking year? But as Mr. Rashmi quite correctly underlined right at the beginning, this is an issue of global cooperation. And in the language of economics, it is global collective action. So given India's position in cumulative emissions, we can make, I think, a very consistent, very strong argument that the correct, robust answer for equity is that India should have, let us not talk about net zero, let us not talk about peaking year, but India is entitled to a fair share of the carbon budget, at least the remaining carbon budget on physical terms, and adjusting for the rest in other forms. And all our effort in mitigation, all the enthusiasm that our youth will have for green technology, green action, for making a sustainable world, this overarching limitation of the remaining carbon budget should actually inspire us to try harder and more consistently for a low carbon path of development. So if we can go on, next slide, one last slide, and I will finish. One more slide. The next. So I think that a fair statement of what I would consider, and I think there is a broad agreement in many ways. Perhaps the details differ across many individuals, but the good way to talk about India's points about development as intergenerational equity and equity and justice as the foundation of sustainability is to say that countries, especially India, we can speak for India, but the other countries can take the same attitude, that we will not exceed our fair share of the global carbon budget, but we cannot compensate, especially in the developing world, for the overconsumption by other countries. So with these words, broadly sketching the issue, let me leave it here. My slides are available with the organizers, so they may feel free, if they wish, to distribute it to participants. I would have no issue with that. Thank you very much, and my apologies, moderator, for a little overstepping my time.
Thank you, Dr. Jaraman. You are always you're so persuasive, and thank you for highlighting this fundamental problem of the carbon budget, which has led to the persistence of the climate change issues, and also difficulties in resolving the issue in the negotiations. But this is an extremely important issue which the young community should know and understand. The solutions, of course, are in the future, the green technologies to which you have referred, the global cooperation, financing, and that all. So let me, with this, thank you, and go over to Dr. Joyita Gupta for her perspective on of how she looks at it. I hope she'll be able to live with her time budget and then give us her views.
Thank you, Dr. Rashmi. I'm assuming you can see my slides and you can hear me.
I can.
All right.
I can hear and see you. Yes.
So unlike Jayaraman, who is youthful in climate, I feel like a senior citizen because I've been working for more than 30 years in this issue of climate change. And I'm going to try to address the questions raised by Dr. Rashmi, but also go beyond a little bit from what Professor Dr. Jayaraman explained. So let me just briefly explain the problem of the conflict between rich and poor countries. If you have time on the x-axis and greenhouse gases on the y-axis, and we need to stabilize the concentrations of greenhouse gases, this means we have to get greenhouse gas emissions to zero. And this means that in 1990, the amount of emissions that there was possible for countries to emit was much larger than as we move towards the future. And so it was easier to have cooperation 30 years ago than as we move into the future. And this is a sort of a thing to keep in mind because the budget shrinks annually. And what has now happened is that in many cases, we are in overshoot, we are over emitting. And this over emitting that is happening worldwide has to be then compensated by either geoengineering or carbon extraction or some other mechanism. And that is what we refer to as net zero. So countries are trying to say, okay, I can't get to zero, but I could get to net zero, which means I emit emissions, but I deduct from that certain other elements, and from that I get to zero emissions. This, for me, is a big challenge. On the one hand, I completely agree that we need every single opportunity and option that there is out there in order to address the problem of achieving 1.5 to 2 degrees. Having said that, the term net is usable for all kinds of cheating. And I think all governments are going to engage in some form of cheating or the other in order to pretend that they are achieving zero emissions. And of course, the later we peak globally, the more strict the reductions have to be, the more steep the reductions have to be. And so to come back to Dr. Jayaraman's argument that India should perhaps say that we will not exceed our equitable boundary, that may be all fine. But the problem is the later you start to reduce your emissions, the more difficult it is, especially in a country of India's size, because you get completely locked into a carbon economy. Just briefly, I'm going to try to run through the whole climate change negotiations for you in one slide. In 1990, the negotiations began. In 1992, you get the Climate Change Convention. At that time, the industrialized countries were supposed to ensure that their emissions peak somewhere between 1990 and 2020 and 2000. And that was exciting. That was the main difference between industrialized countries and poorer countries. But unfortunately, at the last minute, the target was weakened in terms of the language. So although it's there in the text, it's vaguely formulated. We have no targets for the period 2000 to 2008. Because the targets were vaguely formulated in 1997, we get the follow-up Kyoto Protocol. And that protocol led to a target for the period 2008 to 2012, and basically called for industrialized countries to reduce their emissions by 5.2% with respect to 1990 levels. However, eventually, even though this target was legally binding, the US and Canada did not participate. Furthermore, what you do find is that primarily within the European Union, some countries were going to do more and other countries would do less. And this led to some EU countries having plus targets or the right to increase emissions. And this led eventually to Iceland, Norway, and Australia also arguing that they should be allowed to increase their emissions. For the period 2012 to 2020, we needed targets. So we were supposed to come up with an agreement in 2009 in Copenhagen. There was an agreement, but it was quite vague. This became much stronger in the Doha Amendment. And this amendment, unfortunately, was not, on the one hand, it was legally binding. On the other hand, it involved all countries in the world. So every single country had to come up and say what they would do. And upfront, USA, Canada, Russia, and Japan said they would not be participating. And then we get the Paris Agreement of 2015 for the period 2020 and beyond. And that has a long-term target. I could say many things about the word use of the term agreement, but I will leave it as follows, that most governments in the rich countries have committed future governments, but have not committed their current government to taking action. And that's really challenging in this process. In the meanwhile, we have very little time to try to reduce our emissions. So in a sense, of course, we want North-South cooperation. Of course, we want equity. But on the other hand, the problem is we're running out of time to solve this problem. So what do we do? And I think that countries like India are going to suffer very much in the future. If I look at the funds in the regime, there are all kinds of new funds being created all the time, but there is not necessarily a multiplication of financial resources in the regime. So to sum up a very big and complex picture, I would say that with every new fund, we get a new bureaucracy who has to be paid, we get new rules, but we don't necessarily get better and more resources in the regime. This may also have to do with the fact that there are a relatively small number of industrialized countries that are putting money into these systems, between 15 and 20 countries, whereas the rest of the world, around 170 countries, are hoping to be able to gain in one way or the other from these funds. So I would say funds are quite limited. If I look at market mechanisms, I'm quite skeptical about them, but I will just briefly discuss emissions trading for you. It's basically talking about assessing total permissible emissions, dividing between countries, allowing countries to trade, and then the claim that this is efficient. But because for a long time we did not have a target, it was difficult to actually close this circle. We now have the target, but it's still 1.5 to 2 degrees. So there's quite a bit of a difficulty to identify the carbon budget which Jayaraman talked about. And of course, you can divide between countries. Politically, it was quite difficult to talk about a per capita approach, which is sort of the approach that has been brought up, the cumulative per capita approach. And ultimately, in the Kyoto Protocol, we went in implicitly for grandfathering, which meant that the countries that emitted first got a slightly larger process. And essentially what you see is if you go for a per capita approach, then the North would have to buy these rights from the developing world. If you go for a grandfathering approach, the South would have to buy the rights from the North in order to emit. And so the Kyoto Protocol tried to sort of make a bit of confusion about that, where the North had to reduce by 5.2%, but in theory could keep investing in all kinds of market mechanisms in the global South, which was allowed to grow. And so the system was leaking. Since then, we have moved into this whole narrative of that every country must do its bit. And that means we've reached a post-equity world in both Copenhagen, Doha, and Paris. And equity seems to be off the agenda at this particular moment at the political storyline. And to some extent, it also reminds me of this note that was published in 2000, which basically says the history of colonialism goes in parallel with the creation of new commodities, slavery, sugar, tea, coffee, oil, and now carbon. And I'm wondering how easy it is going to be for all of us to try to convince the rich countries to actually compensate for the damage caused, and secondly, to ask them to move forward. So what do we do from a developing country perspective? Now, let's talk a little bit about phasing out fossil fuels. That's the critical problem. The fossil fuel industry is worth between $200 trillion to $300 trillion, depending on what you count. And if you phase it out, this is a massive amount of resources, especially when the world GDP is roughly around $75 to $86 trillion, depending on which year you take. So phasing out fossil fuels is going to be expensive. But if you invest in new fossil fuel right now, you're going to get locked in. And that's going to be extremely expensive. So I would argue that we really need to be very careful in India about every new fossil fuel industrial process. Phasing in renewables, well, you know, when I was in 1972, when I was in Delhi in school, we thought we were going to go for renewables really big in those days. I don't know what happened in India. We did get a renewable energy ministry, but we didn't move fast enough. And there is maybe not enough material for all the batteries. But let's hope that the batteries are feasible and that we can actually phase in renewables globally. And I would say that that is where India really needs to put as much effort as possible. Again, when you look at climate change and other environmental challenges, whether it's biodiversity loss or it is land degradation, air pollution, etc., what it basically all comes down to is the very problem of the way we define development. Dr. Jayaraman talked about our right to develop and how we need to develop. And I'm saying, I don't think GDP is going to be the appropriate metric. I think India has to find a completely new way to examine what is development and how India itself.
I didn't say GDP was the metric.
No, but you did say development.
Yeah,
right.
But development, why do you assume I meant GDP? So please don't put words in my mouth.
Apologies. I wasn't trying to critique you. I was just trying to show that I was listening to what you were saying and link up. But basically, the idea is, how do we define the meaning of development? From my perspective, GDP is a really big problem. And if we are trying to look at the content of development, what does it mean both for Western countries and for developing countries? This is something we really have to spend time on and look at, revisit production, consumption, and disposal patterns. And essentially, in my view, I think the industrialized countries have to reduce emissions. And the bad news, so looking at the right side of my diagram, the bad news for industrialized countries is that they cannot really use their old technologies and dump them on the South. I think that countries like India are superbly equipped with the best brains, and they are very well able to develop their own alternative approaches, and they have to find a shortcut to development which increases some kind of wealth per capita or development per capita without increasing emissions. And I'm talking not just about greenhouse gases now, but also all kinds of urban air pollutants or the use of phosphorus, nitrogen, water, etc. So we have to find a new approach to development. And basically, I wanted to end my story by saying that unfortunately or fortunately, as the case may be, politically, the space for cooperation on climate change seems to have shrunk over time. Secondly, I completely agree that industrialized countries do need to take their responsibility, but I'm becoming more and more convinced that their developing countries are fighting so much among themselves that they have been unable to use the last 30 years to force industrialized countries to take this responsibility. In the meanwhile, we are losing time. To answer question 3 on capacity building, I think that the capacity building from the North may not be the most appropriate capacity building for the global South. And in terms of investments, I think it would be a big mistake for India to invest significantly more resources in a fossil fuel economy, because that will lock India up into the future. And especially for the youth and their children, we really need to solve the climate change problem as fast as possible. I don't know how to get out of this dilemma, but I think at some point we have to talk about what kind of development do we all want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you for your extremely exciting and provocative, another perspective on the whole issue of the climate change. Dr. Jayaraman pointed to the fact that the climate change is taking place because of the cumulative emissions and the carbon budget is limited. You are suggesting that we delink the historical part from the future problems and look at the criticality of the future problem and devise strategies accordingly. Now, one of the things which I think may also need to be addressed, I hope.
Dr. Rashmi, I don't disagree with Dr. Jayaraman's argument that
I think we will have time for that. I was just pointing out, the matrix of the discussion, that as far as you said that the investments are going to be locked in the carbon intensive sectors. So that is the real challenge as to how to make this transition now. So where are the investments going to come from, and what kind of models we can evolve, considering the fact that the finance within the system is very, very limited. So what is it that we can do to mobilize at scale, scalable, affordable, and immediate? So let me, with this, go over to Professor Dalbeek and request him for his views on the problem and also suggestions for the way forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashmi, and I hope you hear and see me well. I have no slides. I have no slides, but I was involved, as you know, for more than 2 decades in policy making on climate, in climate change in the EU. And I'm no longer an official of the EU, so I would like to underline that for the sake of a good understanding. But I will talk a little bit with the European perspective and as my experience as a background. As you pointed out, Dr. Rashmi, at the beginning, we are at a very important moment. We are preparing for COP26. We have been seeing how urgent climate change is. We face a common problem. All over the world, we are impacted. Also, over the summer, the Europeans were rather hit with flooding, with forest fires, as the rest of the world was. And in the middle of all that drama, we had the IPCC report. And the only thing I would take out of that is that we have to act all together as soon and as thorough that we can. And we have to have a pragmatic view at these things. And let me point out 3 elements for the debate, which I would like to keep as concise as possible for the sake of time. The first is that the EU is strongly committed to reduce its emissions because, as was indicated by Professor Jojariaraman and by Joyita Gupta, we have no other option in the industrialized world than to reduce our emissions. And we have to do that fast. And the EU declared its objective as climate neutral by 2050. And that's close to the figures and the time budget that I think was put up by Professor Jojariaraman. At the same time, I would like to point out that the EU is not going to rely on credits and on carbon trading, but it's going to be a domestic objective to move towards 0 emissions by 2050. And the intermediate goal is 55% reduction by 2030 based on 1990 levels. Now, these targets are quite demanding politically. And I think, going to 0 emissions for indeed a continent that is heavily industrialized and in which industrial revolution started is going to be a big challenging project. Now, we are committed. The European Commission proposed more than a dozen of proposals in the field of energy, industry, transport, agriculture, forestry, finance, development cooperation in all parts of our public policy making. There is one element, however, that I would like to bring to your attention, and that is on the carbon market. Joyita Gupta rightly said and criticized the domestic market at the international level, but the EU is using a domestic market for its internal purposes, and it works. We have been reducing with 43% the emissions in a time span of not more than 15 years since it started in 2005, and where we are today, we did that. Now, the corollary of that is that the prices for carbon have gone up, and today the carbon price is beyond 60 euros per ton. And the grumbling is starting to hit the industry, is starting to hit all households and consumers. And that shows the pain that is involved in reducing our emissions in a path to net zero. We see it, we observe it, and that is one of the reasons why we are not hesitating to go forward, but we will have to address a few problems. And one of the problems is carbon leakage. And one of the proposals that the European Commission made is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is a tax on imports, on embedded carbon in imports in the European Union. And I think this proposal is an open invitation to the rest of the world to go into a discussion, because carbon leakage is not helping anybody. It is not helping the EU. It is not helping the world. It doesn't bring us closer to reaching our climate targets. So we have to have a debate, and it's going to kick in by 2026. So that means we have 3 to 5 years to get into a decent discussion, whether it is at the United Nations level in the context of the Framework Convention on Climate Change, fine, but it should also be in the context of the WTO, because it's about trade we are talking. And I would hope very much that the G20 is going to take that forward, because that is the real, these are the real countries that are affected by the carbon border adjustment and need to be talked about. So I would like us to sum up my first point to indicate the European target is close to the deadlines that Professor Jojaraman was indicating to us. It is a domestic target, and we have to talk trade, because if we don't talk trade, we don't come closer to sorting out the climate problems. Hence my second point I would like to make. And the second point is that when we talk about common but differentiated responsibilities, we have to look at it in a realistic manner. We can talk for endlessly about what we agreed in the past, but today we are where we are. And I would beg your understanding to have a look at how the EU is de facto implementing the common but differentiated responsibilities internally. Because the EU is 27 member states. And the EU is not only Germany or the Netherlands or the Scandinavian countries. It is also about income levels in countries that are comparable to many regions in the developing countries. Think about income per capita in Portugal or in Romania or in Bulgaria, that is way below the income levels that we currently see, for example, in countries, without finger pointing to any country, like countries like Singapore or Saudi Arabia. And so I would not jump too much to extrapolate the Annex 1, non-Annex 1 dichotomy. We have to move beyond that. And I think that is what the Paris Agreement was doing. We have to have a more flexible interpretation and a more pragmatic interpretation of the common differentiated responsibility, because we have an urgent problem in front of us. The scope of what we all have to do is daunting, and we need to have a pragmatic look into that and not be overly rigid in interpreting a constraint that is there and that we fully recognize in jumping to a number of policy actions that is, suboptimal. My third question derives from that. When is there and where is the scope for cooperation and for, how we are going to work together in the future? Well, we all have similar problems. We have in the EU coal, and we know we have to move out of coal. Many developing countries, including India, has coal, and also India ultimately will have to move out of coal. Now, coal is a very difficult political issue because we talk about coal mining and coal miners, workers. We talk about coal-fired power generation. So we talk about an economic cluster on which we have to move out. And that is what we are determined to do in the European Union. Let's not be misunderstood, but we could compare notes with one another. how we are doing that. And how we are doing that in the EU is by indeed shifting around technology, supporting each other on technological development, and also shifting around finance and investments and soft finance and hard finance. And so my plea for cooperation would be that we compare notes, that we leave behind, we compare notes in a pragmatic manner, and we talk and discuss policy design. We talk about technology and low carbon technology in particular, and we talk about finance in that perspective. Because I would, I would agree with Joyita Gupta that we have been creating funds, low carbon funds. Every COP has created something new, and a lot of bureaucracy is involved into all that. And it works not in an optimal manner. We fully recognize that. So perhaps we have to go into another mood, how we can have much more domestic forces where we make good projects. We create economic opportunity as much as social attraction in lots of the policies on which we can learn from one another. And I see there a lot of perspective for future cooperation. So I would say finance is important. It is also important internally in the EU when we have to help our friends from Poland and Romania and other places to move out of coal, for example. But at the same time, we do that in a tight manner. We do not give just finance like this. We say, yes, you get the finance provided you participate in a number of policies and you bring us forward into reducing of the emissions. So to cut it short, with your understanding, I would like to bring in a very pragmatic angle. And the pragmatic angle is how are we going to design all of us policies that can reduce emissions? We fully understand the differentiated context that historically is there, that economically is there, that politically is all there, but that's a fact of life. You know, we can debate for a long time historical parameters, but the future is what it is. We want to tackle climate change, and so perhaps we have to have a fresh look at some of the elements we have been discussing so far. Thank you very much, Mr. Rafmi.
Thank you, Professor Delbeek. Thank you for giving us a very, very extremely informative and useful overview of what European Union is doing and what is your view on the way forward. I mean, thanks for your caution on the need to take a pragmatic view. And then you have suggested, of course, the domestic carbon pricing as one of the possible tools for mobilizing the required finance. Of course, there can be discussion on this that needs a separate discussion altogether. To what extent they are feasible and desirable, and whether they actually meet the entire need. But that's for a separate day. I can see that the organizers have appeared on the screen, so which I am being already cautioned that we are running out of our time, and then they are planning to perhaps go for interview of some of the young members. So what I will do is, if I have your permission, Taru, tell me how to move forward on this now.
Yes, sir, you are absolutely correct. I now hand over to my young representatives, Darsh and Ryan. They have a couple of questions for all of you. And
but let me understand that after the end of the interview session, do I come back and then conclude again with the other questions and answers?
Sir, we are really running out of time. So what we've done is we've collated all the questions and we'll try to see how best we can solve the queries of students who are writing on chat especially.
In that case, before you move forward, let me thank all the panelists here first. They have made extremely important and very, very deeply researched and extremely insightful presentations and presented the perspectives. Dr. Jayaraman, as usual, he was extremely fact-based in his presentation, and he has a particular view, and which is Perhaps the way of there are different ways of defining equity, but he has a very strong view on that. And counterpoise was Dr. Gupta's view on how we should divide the responsibility in the present context, supported by Professor Delvik. But fundamentally, when we try to move in the future along and together to resolve this problem in the future, we will the terms of the cooperation have to be settled. The issue is that in the future the emissions have to be reduced globally, and therefore the space is extremely tight, and we all need to cooperate. So, what are the possible ways in which we can invest in green technologies, in green industries, in greening the economic activities, so that we don't get locked in, as Dr. Gupta was saying. And the critical issue is that of building the right quantum of technologies, the finance, and the capacities. So can we build a global system for doing that? Or we leave it entirely to the national capacities? That is a question. A global problem needs a global cooperative framework. So ultimately, we will have to decide on these emerging issues of global technology platforms for greening the development and shortening the transition period, so that we don't unnecessarily get locked in carbon intensive development process. So let me conclude here. Thank you once again. Thank all the panelists, and over to you, Taru.
Thank you, Professor Rashmi, for moderating the session, and thank you to all the speakers for such a motivating and power-packed discussions. I now hand over to Darsh. Darsh is a student in Delhi Public School, and he's here to ask few questions from you. Please, Darsh, over to you.
Hi, so I think I am now audible. It was taking some time to unmute. So hi there. First of all, good evening to the scientists and experts and all the people on the panel. It was really great to listen to all the important and crucial pointers for us young people who have to now take forward the advocacy on the subject, while obviously considering the deep social inequities. It feels really great to be a part of the conclave again. So the question I would like to put forward to the panel really is that how is the global community addressing the local responsibilities of the climate conventions from the past?
Dr. Joyita, please unmute.
I'll try to take that question. When you talk about a global community, I don't know what you mean. What normally happens is each country sends negotiators, and these negotiators come to a particular venue and they discuss what they're going to do. But they're not really functioning as a community as such. They're basically arguing from the perspective of their own country. And so what happens is you do get at the end of that discussion the highest of the least lowest common positions of all countries. So it's not very high, it's just the highest of the lowest common positions. And that's why when they're looking at, for example, the concerns of the youth or the concerns of local communities, if that has not been articulated by their national representatives at the international arena, that doesn't show up quite as strongly as you would expect. Very often that is brought up by the NGOs and other actors at these meetings, but they also don't have a vote. So it's a complex process.
Can I come in with a brief remark on that question? Moderator?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sure, sir.
So I would not have such a dismissive attitude to the role of governments, because the youth as a constituency, of course we recognize, but youth are part of their societies also, and similarly when you talk of communities of various kinds across the world. So the common, it is not, I think, the case that at all times that the international community, in the sense of the community of nations, acts at the minimum or the maximum. For example, the UNFCC itself, the Climate Convention itself, is an excellent document. And it was produced very rapidly over a very short period. There were differences. There is a very beautiful account of this by Dr. Chandrasekhar Dasgupta, Ambassador Dasgupta, in Navroz Dubash's edited volume. Please go through that history. So there are moments in history where you recognize inequalities, where you recognize the need for a sustainable and just world. The very foundation of the United Nations at the end of the Second World War was such an event. So I think to cooperate between nations is important. We must find the way forward. But this has to be done recognizing inequalities not only within nations or dismissing the negotiations as, actors coming together who cannot agree, but there is both the sense of community in the sense of the community of nations and community in the sense of our own domestic communities. So I think, especially in developing countries, when they come to the negotiations, at the back of their minds is also their domestic context. So when we say, like India often says, I think correctly, that agriculture should not first primarily be the location of mitigation, but is really the site of adaptation, or that forests of the third world are in danger from global warming and they cannot simply be used as dumping grounds for first world carbon. We are talking to the world, but we are keeping very much our local context in mind. So I think when I argued at the beginning that development is intergenerational equity for us, it has very deeply embedded what we have to do with agriculture, what we our